Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. I'd like to welcome all the viewers for our discussion on this very important topic of reading Srila Prabhupada's books every day and its importance for our personal spiritual life and for ISKCON as a movement. In our previous interviews, we've talked to several leaders and devotees who've had an intimate association with Srila Prabhupada's books in the form of distributing books, reading books over a period of several years. One of the leaders even had the good fortune of participating in the production of Chaitanya Charitamrita in the 70s, and so on and so forth. Today is an exclusive in a sense that we have the opportunity to talk to a personality who had an intimate association with Srila Prabhupada and his books from a very different perspective. I'd like to welcome for this conversation His Grace Puskar Prabhu, a disciple of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, who gave us all a vision of the spiritual world through his windows to the spiritual world. Puskar Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Right.
Thank you, Puskar Prabhu, for joining us today for this discussion on reading Srila Prabhupada's books every day and its importance. When I was trying to go through your background and history and your association with ISKCON, I started to look at the various wonderful services that you contributed to. And I was reminded of this English phrase that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And when I looked at some of the work that you've undertaken on your website, I said I need not look further into what you have contributed. We are all recipients of your service. Puskar Prabhu, what was your first interaction with Srila Prabhupada's books?
Okay. When I was in San Francisco, for instance, I lived by chance. Let's say I lived 1.5 blocks. San Francisco is full of hills, so up the hill, Frederick Street was the street that the temple was on, and I lived 1.5 blocks up that hill. And I used to go to the temple. I previously had seen Prabhupada in 66, 7, definitely 67, but I didn't have any contact with books in those days, those books anyway. And so in 68, then when I moved to that area, which was the Haight-Ashbury, famous district of San Francisco, the temple was 1.5 blocks down the hill. So when I went there, the first book that I remember getting was from Upendra, and he gave me a tiny Gita, which was probably a Gita press Gita, very tiny, probably 1.5 inches or something. I don't think the Gita had come out, or if it did, they didn't have access. He just gave me it because it was a freebie. I couldn't chronologically say why he gave me that. If the blue Gita had not probably come out yet, probably there was no Gita, so he gave me this little Gita. So you can't say it, but he gave it to me, and I read some of it. But there's a backstory, because some devotees, they read Gita, their parents even had Gita. My parents didn't have Gita. They had many books, but they didn't have that type of book. And but my friend Kushakwada, that I kind of grew up with from the age of 9, he was a big, he had ended up translating many books later on when he joined the movement. But before joining, even when I knew him in the, say, 65, say 6, because he read voluminous, he systematically would read every book on philosophy from the library. So I read more than most, but I didn't want to read that many books. So I asked him one time on the phone. I hadn't seen him in a long time. I said, what book would you say is the best? He immediately said, Bhagavad Gita. He had that kind of high voice. Bhagavad Gita. He was an Abhadut, really. You don't need any other book. So, that was in the back of my head. somewhere stored. And so I knew there was something to it because he had read everything from anything readable in philosophy, but he immediately said, you don't need any other book. Not that I started to go out and get a Gita, but I had some idea about Bhagavad Gita anyway. So it must have been.
Which year was this, Prabhu, that you had this interaction with Upendra Prabhu?
Upendra is 68, but I can't give the month. I can't say the month, but it was definitely 68 when I lived on Frederick Street, just above from the temple, about a block. I used to go to the Sunday feast. I don't remember anybody trying to give me a Gita, but it wasn't that much longer after, I'd say, the beginning of 69 when I contacted, there was one guy named Larry. I found out later that he had lived at the Second Avenue Temple and he had a wife and a kid, and we were living up, not in San Francisco, we were living up in a little commune in Napa, and he had all the books that were printed. In fact, he used to play the Happening album every morning, and he would offer his food. I just I didn't have any feeling for it at all, but I did glance at, I'm not sure if he had TLC, but I know he had Isha Upanishad, he had the Blue Gita. I didn't go back and really, maybe you know when the Blue Gita came out, in 68, probably sometime. So he had that. I glanced at it. He had Isho and he had a few BTGs that I remember looking at. But he had an array of other books, Autobiography of Yogi, all that type of stuff. And he used to go off, and I used to babysit his kid while him and his wife would go off chanting. Sometimes they did Hatha Yoga. I didn't know. They just went off for about an hour every morning. And I would babysit his kid. We traveled around California, and I had a big kind of a van. And so he was into it, and he played that Happening album. But he was a fanatic macrobiotic. I want to say this. He wasn't, he may have been offering the food and all that, but he apparently had moved away from the temple because he didn't like white sugar. And, we were eating like organic brown rice and all that. It was a fad, still a fad probably, called macrobiotic food. But he got me hooked on vegetarian. That was in probably the beginning of 69, end of 68 or so.
Did you have interest in reading philosophy at the time when you received these books?
I wasn't so big on philosophy. I mean, I read things like Ginsberg and that type of thing. I was pretty wild, I was pretty much of a archetypal hippie. Maybe not on the highest level like Shyamsundar and Malati. I mean, that's some really wild stuff when you read Shyamsundar's book. But yeah, I was a little wild. I mean, Upendra used to try to engage me to paint because he knew I was a painter. And I was just not painting that. I asked him, what does Krishna look like? And he showed me, it was actually, I specifically remember a poster on the wall of Surdas, a famous one where he's blind and with Krishna. It was nice. I said, no, I can't do that style. I was just, interestingly enough, though, he, at several times he tried to induce me, but he was saying, you can do anything for Swamiji, just like Jayananda. He pointed at Jayananda, who was in the front of the temple. Front means, you've probably seen the pictures of that temple, thin. It was smaller than 26 Second Avenue, probably. Anyway, he was sitting with his right side to me, and I think they had Jagannath by that time. I'm not sure, but I think they did. Anyway, so he said, see Jayananda, he drives a cab for Swamiji. But when I saw Jayananda, he was very, his eyebrows were knit, and he was sitting in like a half lotus chanting japa, and I thought, wow, that guy's a cab driver. I remember thinking that's pretty amazing, because when you're a cab driver, that's not a very high position. But when I saw Jayananda, I thought, well, that guy is a cab driver. I was like, doesn't fit, I was like, he's so far out, so into his chanting, well, not that I was into chanting at all. I used to come mostly for the prasad, but but I didn't start looking at those books until half a year later. I don't know, maybe half a year or so. When I went up in the country, I wasn't no longer in San Francisco. There's other anecdotes, but I don't know if you want to bring them in. They don't exactly line up with reading the books. But Larry and his wife, his daughter, they invited me. It was 69. Rath Yatra, but we were up in the country. So he said, "You want to come?" And I hadn't been to the other Rath Yatras. He had, so I didn't have a clue. Otherwise, I probably would have gone. So we didn't go. When he came back, though, his white van had Krishna written in huge letters on the side of it. It was pretty dramatic, and it was done with a huge brush or roller or something, and the letters were dripping. And I thought, "Wow, that's into it." And the other guy who had organized this commune, he was still kind of a media, I'm sure he was. And he was a really strange, interesting fellow. I was attracted to him because he did not have long hair. Everyone else he had short hair, he had shaved hair. This other fellow. And he would go into the forest and do something mysterious. And one time I followed him from a distance, and he was chanting Hare Krishna, clapping his hands. I thought that, well, these guys are chanting Hare Krishna. I had chanted.
Yes. So how did you get involved? I mean, directly in the temple life, and at what point in life, and what inspired you to get involved?
Well, I won't say it's the book. So, but basically, I never joined. So what happened was I went to Hawaii in the end of '69 because the flower thing was kind of getting rough. It wasn't so nice. So we flew to the Big Island of Hawaii, and I stayed there till the end of March, from end of December, end of March, only 3 months. It seems like it was a long time. So the first day of April, I was I flew to a different island. There was some hippie guy, and he said, "Hey man, I'm flying to another island." Okay. So I flew, and the very next day I had nowhere to sleep. I didn't know that Maui Island at all. So I was up all night, and I was kind of in a bad shape. So while I was, anyway, I was sitting and playing harmonica under this big banyan tree. A guy taps me on the shoulder, I open my eyes. He said, "Hey, you want to jam with us, man?" And I said, what's going on? And on the other side of the tree, it's a big banyan tree. There were devotees chanting and distributing some prasad, but I didn't really think the difference of ISKCON. I didn't know the word. It was ISKCON, actually. Really, I didn't know the word ISKCON. It's like Ajamil didn't know what is Narayan, I didn't know anything. But they were chanting, and at the end of after 45 minutes, they said, "Oh, we're going back to our ashram, So they said, "You want to come?" And I said, "Well, it's all right, man. I follow my vibrations, hippie thing." So I got in the car. It was packed with about 9 people in a small car. And then I joined. There was a splinter group, the Sai group, the Siddhasarup group. You're intelligent, you probably studied the history of ISKCON. So then I joined. It was like a halfway house where I don't think I would have been attracted to just straight on shaving up. But, the people there, I mean, they followed the principles, but they were, and it was beautiful ashram, I mean, it was a rundown old house, but Maui is beautiful. You could grow things and the fruit trees, amazing place. So I stayed there, and they had books, and we used to, I'm getting to the point. There's some misunderstanding about Sai, but I actually believe 100% that we studied more than the ISKCON people in general, because he had us, he wasn't even there. He was on another island. He came after about 5-6 weeks that I'd been there. But the regimen was that every day we would chant. We chanted 16 rounds. After a while, we chanted 24 rounds. But we would read from every single book. And we were reading from TLC. Krishna book came out a few weeks after I'd been there, maybe a month. Someone brought one from the mainland, like I think it came out, Brahmananda describes it, was August or 70. So here we are in April, right? So this few months before. So we're reading, I think we already had those, we had the red volumes of the first canto. We had maybe 1 or 2 of the second cantos had come out from Boston that devotees were printing at ISKCON Press. So we had Isho, we had the Blue Gita, Nectar Devotion, I believe, definitely. And so we read from about 5 books every day we had class. So we weren't slacking on that. They didn't have as many classes when I joined the mainstream ISKCON. We had class morning and evening, and it was Nectar Devotion and Gita at night and Bhagavatam in the morning. And then, yeah, but definitely he was pushing the books. Sai was. He was having us reading the books.
And
So,
did reading those books sort of leave any impressions on you? And
well,
anything
really,
that
what's most notable is one night or day, I just couldn't put down the TLC. I decided I just, I just kept reading it, I kept reading and I was just reading. I was really fascinated by all the expansions of Godhead and I don't remember how much I read. I read several chapters, right? And everybody else was sleeping in the ashram. And something really came over me really big time where I was just, I would like to pinpoint the exact part, but gradually or suddenly I had this amazing realization how everyone was just embodied, and everyone was suffering. Some part of the TLC, of course, TLC, you can't say the whole thing could induce that mood, right? But so I'm looking at all of the devotees in there, and they were all taking rest, and I'm up. It was like midnight, maybe even up past midnight, and I was looking at them, and I was thinking, wow. I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, they're such great souls, but I was thinking, because they were the only entities there, thinking how everyone was embodied, and I really had this realization of that. I felt this all-encompassing, compassionate mode, and I was really felt. And from reading that TLC, but I can't say it was any other book, but it was definitely the TLC, and I just read it and read several chapters in a row. I just got absorbed in it.
Yes, yes. Well, the most profound and teaching of Srila Prabhupada, we can say, is definitely that, to remind us that we are not the body and we are all embodied. Although a lot of us now start to skim that part whenever we're reading books, although rarely do we have realization of it in fact.
I think I might have realizations 50 years ago. I think I might have had more realization. I might have slacked by this time. Yeah. And not only that, because when we used to do Harinam, we'd have to drive a ways, like 40, 45 minutes to go to a town. We were, at Maui's kind of distant place. But I used to kind of automatically see everyone as a little expansion of Krishna, all the people. Everyone's face would remind Krishna. I don't know if that does that. I don't know if it was there was something, you get that. It was like people describe it when you first join, you get like a certain bargain, to bring you in the store, to bring you in, they'll sell you something, one item at half price, So I was there getting that half price bargain. and those. And I was seeing
some of us do get that initial, what people call the initial drop of mercy, but possibly not with that kind of intensity that you just described. That's intense, to be able to have that kind of an experience and let the what you're reading sort of coming alive in one's consciousness and one's perceptions.
Yeah. Yeah, you can ask me more questions, but now one thing is, Krishna book came out a little after, I think it was August. I was just hearing Brahmananda telling that story, so I believe it was by August. I was on another island, and Prabhupada came there to Oahu, and I was still with the other group, and we all went to the ISKCON temple. We were a separate group, but there was at least 30 of us, and Prabhupada was on his way to Japan and India, I believe, and Madhavisa was leading a kirtan, and in the temple, I think Kirtananda was there, and there was Devananda. He was like the servant. I remember him, and at least those three. Especially, I remember Madhavisa and Devananda, because he was helping the Prabhupada set up the microphone, and later on, I connected the dots. I mean, I didn't know anyone's name, And then later, million years later, Govinda Dasi turned over that tape to the archives, and I happened to be there. It's August. He came for one night, one day in Hawaii, and on that tape, on that lecture, what I did remember was Prabhupada showed up. We were having kirtan, and Prabhupada wasn't in the room, and there was a side door and Prabhupada suddenly appeared, and the sun was kind of setting, not darkish, but just the beginning of sunset, and it was beautiful Hawaii blue, pinkish orange, sunset, and he appeared like all shaved up in the doorway, in the threshold of the door, and he looked so amazing, and I was like, wow, clean shaven, he looked clean, like someone had dropped him off from a flower airplane from Vaikuntha, and he just walked in the door, and then while I was thinking how amazing, he just did his dandavats in front of the Panchatattva deities, then walked up on the Vyasa. Of course, things were quiet. Now the kirtan had stopped. And during the lecture, I always remembered, he said, "You will see God face to face," and put his hand up like that. But when I heard the tape decades later, he had said, "So you should all join here," indicating the subgroup, the offshoot should join. Of course, we probably didn't pick up on it, but he did say it. And we did actually, after I think it was in October, finally. Wasn't my call, but yeah, they all joined there.
That must have been quite an amazing first impression and first darshan of Srila Prabhupada, the way you just described it.
Yeah, I saw Prabhupada before, I want to say in 67, definitely. I saw Prabhupada now, things were a little wild in the 60s. My parents actually saw Prabhupada in Tompkins Square in 66. And they said that I definitely had seen Prabhupada, but I didn't remember. It didn't stick out of my head. So they may have not. They actually did. They did see him, but because they used to go to that section of town, and they were pretty hip, as my parents. They claimed that I was there and I saw him too. But what I really remember is 67 in May that I saw him, and because it was a theater situation across from the 26 Second Avenue, and there was something going on there. And I was in some anti-war theater group, and then Prabhupada there, and he chanted. He didn't speak much though. He only said a few sentences about transcendental sound vibration, but there weren't any books being passed out. Prabhupada was just part of the program, There were others there.
So Prabhu, you've been an artist since almost practically infancy. When I was looking at your interaction and your development into an artist, Prabhu, you mentioned earlier on that when Upendra Prabhu first showed you the picture, you said this is not the kind of style you may want to do or you like to do. At which point in your life did you actually decided to adopt that style or start engaging? Because clearly, when you were reading these books, the TLC, did it occur to you in your visualization that this is something now you like to put on a canvas using your brush? When did that transition happen?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's okay. So TLC, there's no color pictures, and E-show, there's a cover, I think. And so when Krishna Book came out, which I'd been in the Maui ashram, then that was really impressive. Because the Blue Gita, there was also no color pictures. So you don't get a real impression until you, and the Nectar Devotion, we had it. So there might have been a couple of pictures there as well. But the real impression is when you got the first Krishna Book, #1, right? And we used to keep it so carefully in our ashram, wrapped up in a nice cloth. But the pictures were really enlivening, far out, wow. Actually, in retrospect, the Krishna Book 1 has, it's a whole history of the art department. But Jadurani was painting in Boston. I mean, I didn't know all these details, so I found out, later. So she had this particular style, and Muralidhar, they were, and it was one other, Devahuti. She was an older lady in her 40s, and everyone was 23. She was probably 45, 47, late 40s. So when you saw some of those pictures, anyway, they were very impressive. But later, Krishna Book 2 and 3, when Bhardwaj joined, then the paintings became more. So by the time I joined and went to LA in October of 70, LA Temple had paintings that were sent from Boston. And those paintings were, I really admired those paintings. And I thought, and had a Panchatattva that Bhardwaj, well, there was an assembly line with Bhardwaj and Muralidhar and Jadharani, and then there was Devahuti. Anyway, they had a beautiful Devahuti painting, a few of them. One was up in Prabhupada's quarters. They still have them. I don't know if you want to talk all about the art, but as far as that goes, when I was with Sai, who became Siddhaswarup later, he had me painting as well. And we did, there was another guy named Bo Schneff. He was a pretty well-known top San Francisco poster artist, older. Now he's 80, 81. And he and I used to do these handbills we'd give out in Honolulu. Every week we'd produce one. So we were, and I did some painting portraits of Sai, oil painting. So I got into it. Then when I came to LA, Karandar saw that I had some talent. So he had me doing the guru paintings. I wasn't doing any book paintings. I was just doing parampara, 4 or 5, the gurus like that. And there were, for most of the temples, like on the West Coast, there was Santa Barbara and San Diego, LA, Laguna. At least I did 4 disciplic successions. And I did one big Sankirtan painting, which is still hanging there. If you go to LA, it's on the stairwell going up Prabhupada's quarters. They found it after decades. And so I got into it like that. And so one day, Karandar came into where I was working and said, "Oh, I think you should go and join the artists in Boston." So I said, "Well, okay, that's far. I'll go." And then Devahuti, who was a senior person, she came in a few days before I flew to. It just moved, but within a week, 2-week period, the art department moved to New York, to the Brooklyn Tiffany place. So when the studio wasn't even finished. Nothing, it was like a week. They'd gotten that Brooklyn temple several months before, beginning of 70, but as far as the press and the art department, they were just moving that time. So I never went to Boston. I went there. But Devahuti came into my studio and said how she couldn't get along with the other artists. And I couldn't really focus on what she meant until years later I read Prabhupada's letters, and he was telling Jadharani how they should, accommodate her. She's older and she should be given. She might have even complained, but she couldn't work on this particular system they had where all the artists worked on one painting. She had wanted to do her own painting, and they were nice paintings. And I don't think they tried to repress her, but somehow or other it came that then she stopped doing for quite a while until later when we had the CC marathon. Then she took up and did a few paintings. But at the time she was pretty old and she did some few things, but she did some quite nice paintings. They were there. That was really impressed me. Her paintings, especially, and other paintings as well. They had the original Krishna book, one cover with Radha Krishna, which was really a cover, copy of a poster, another poster, but they had an ISKCON feel to it. And that guy, Larry, that I mentioned, who had the books when I was living in California, outside of San Francisco, he came one day, and he didn't know I was there, but that I joined the movement, and he was trying to get Krishna book number 2. So I got him one. Of course, he was surprised that I joined, So I was telling him the whole history, how I joined. And he said, "So you joined because of Sai?" I said, "I guess so." Anyway, it's fine.
Prabhu, in terms of when you moved to Brooklyn and in New York, of course, in Brooklyn, after that, when the art department started to develop, did you get an opportunity to hear from Srila Prabhupada personally on what he felt was the importance of the pictures in the books, and something that you could like to share with us, which others may not know and you may know?
Well, I don't want to endorse Jadharani's book, but she has a big, detailed history of the art department in, Art of Spiritual Life book. It's like 600 pages, but yeah, that's all there. All the letters that he wrote. We, as a young new devotee, I got to go in and get probably a lot more association than I would have or should have if I'd not been an artist. We kind of got a lot more association, right? But in the beginning, when I came, I tried to do some first canto paintings. See, by the time I got there, they were working on Gita. Krishna book was all finished. And the Gita paintings, they moved them down from Boston. They were like partially finished, say more than half, I'd say, going on 2/3 worth of finish. So they were in the midst of, there were several that were started from scratch while I was there, but I didn't get one. But the only contribution I could do for Gita was, because I was good at painting Prabhupada, I did one little face of Prabhupada. And Jayadwaita came in and he saw that and he said, "Oh, that's super excellent." So he put it on the back cover of the first that Gita that came out. What do you call it? What's that company? Dip, you know, yeah, the fat first Gita. But I was sitting there when that first canto came out next to Prabhupada, and he was admiring the 1-1 from Dynapon, and he was looking through the pictures, and he said, "Oh, he said the artists are the best book distributors." He said the artists are the best book. So you compare that to not long after, the next time Prabhupada came, then the Gita came out, and that he looked at the binding and it was very carefully, Prabhupada, like nothing would escape his the tiniest thing, you see. So he didn't consider the binding and the paper or as good as Dynapon. So he was saying like that, right? And Jayadwaita was there. He was repeating what they had said, why, it could have been better, and Prabhupada, I remember that he said, they are simply greedy. He put his fingers up, like that. They were simply greedy. And just like the man was dancing and tripping, and he said there was a hill, although there was no hill. So they're making an excuse why it should have been better, So anyway, it was accepted like that. What can you do? He printed so many Gitas at the time. So as far as anything, when we probably came in 71 during my initiation week, really, he came up to the press and he's quite a few pictures. There's no pictures of him really hardly upstairs in the art department, but there's pictures of him looking downstairs. But when he came up with a few other devotees, just asked Muralidhar in 71. So generally we were going over to his quarters. Basically, he didn't come over. The next time I remember him coming over was in LA. He came up when they just got set up some of the buildings for the marathon. The marathon hadn't started when he got there. Interestingly enough, and years later, I started to realize that Prabhupada was so pragmatic, because I came in 75 from Mayapur to Vrindavan just to go to the festival. And I decided, I even left my initiated beads in Mayapur. I just thought I'm coming back. And then somewhere out of the blue, Prabhupada said that I should go to LA and paint. And Jai Pataka was knowing, he was the manager of Mayapur. And he even said to Prabhupada, I wasn't in the room, but he said later on, he said, well, you told that boy to stay in Mayapur and help us paint so many things. He said, no, it's better if you go to LA. So in retrospect, I'm thinking he probably had this marathon planned, It looked like he sprung that whole, it wasn't just CC, by the way, it was 17 books. We already had 2 CCs out. So it was the 5th canto plus 15 CCs, I guess you've heard that about the marathon.
Yes. Wow. And Prabhu, in terms of, in order to produce these beautiful paintings and to visualize, did Srila Prabhupada want the artists to read his books regularly? Would he sort of quiz the artists? Are you reading? What are you seeing? So on and so forth.
No doubt about that. But we got the books first. I mean, I remember going, for instance, this is a dramatic thing. I shouldn't even say it on a recording, but I don't know. But I was sent to several times to get the manuscripts from, even when I was in Mayapur in 74, before I went back, and Prabhupada was working on, I would do sometime night guard, and Prabhupada was translating. So I had definitely, Nitai was there. Later he left. So, and then Prabhupada, I would do night guard sometimes and hear Prabhupada doing the dictaphone. And he was doing the Ancha Leela stories. Particularly remember one night, it was mind-boggling. He was doing the story of how Advaita Acharya had sent a sonnet that rice is no longer available in the marketplace.
Oh, yes.
Deity is called. And then the deity is again sent away, right? And so And Prabhu was clicking, and I was thinking, wow, this is too far out. And then he was doing that really intimate pastime. It's probably in the same chapter where the Lord Chaitanya was. I don't know if it's the same chapter. I'm not that expert, but basically, when he floated in the ocean up to Konark, and they found him, and then he was describing. He said, "Why did you bring me back here? You made this big tumult, this big noise, brought me back." Which, probably the sweetest singing in the universe, but he said, "You brought me back," But basically, describing there about the gopis and Krishna splashing, with the pink, this very amazing thing. It's Krishna's Kaviraj all the way. The pink lotuses and the blue lotuses, and they're splashing like that. And I was hearing it. It may have been a different night. And so then the previous chapters were being transcribed, and I was getting them straight from Kadumna and Nitai. I would demand, I'd say, they were like transcribing the tapes and typing them out, and I would read them right away. So I always had a chance to read books before anybody else. Not always,
wow.
But and then in LA, so yeah, I also had to go several times and I got the 5th canto transcripts. I remember I got the 5th 5-2 transcript and 75. But the actual images would be Jadharani and Rameshwar would pick out, which at that time, I mean, previous to that, Rameshwar wasn't involved. And then I never had any say in which painting. When I first came to New York to paint, aside from the guru painting, they did give me some first canto paintings because I was creative, but I didn't have, like I said, I was a little spaced out. I couldn't really pin down the detail in it, for several years. So I was able to design a few paintings, just like painting first canto where Arjuna and Krishna is sitting up and speaking with Krishna has long hair, and actually probably didn't approve of the long hair. So most people may not know that, but he several times. Jadharani admits it on her memory tapes and in her book. She's quite humble about that. And then when I was with Bardraj, we spoke to Prabhupada about the books and about painting for about 45, 50 minutes in 75. He also brought that up about the long hair. That was a thing. And the one letter that I stayed away from asking too many questions, but I was doing one painting in say 8th canto with Sukracharya and Palad, and Bali Maharaj is in the middle. And one of them is giving him a conch or a chariot, a garland that doesn't fade. Anyway, I asked if Sukracharya should have a beard, and Prabhupada, unfortunately, the painting came out and we didn't get the answer in time, but Prabhupada said avoid beards as far as possible. He didn't want beards, so against beards. But the questions would be asked. So in first canto it was several paintings like Prickett being cursed. It's like a 2-level painting. You see Prickett is putting a snake on Samika Rishi, and then the boy Shringi is cursing. It's like a 2-level. They probably replaced it by now in different versions, but the original version. So I worked on that. I worked on, there was a Super Soul painting in the old first canto also, which Jadharani gave me to do. I couldn't complete it. She also finished it. And another one I remember doing, and one was totally rejected that I tried to do, Arjun. Actually, no one ever did that painting. Even years later, I found it in one of my relatives' house. And I thought, oh, wow, that painting's here. It's amazing. My aunt, it was Arjun with Yudhisthira, and then all the Kali Yuga things were, I made.
Yes.
Maybe this whole foreboding scene, it was really spooky with owls flying around. It wasn't so well painted, but somehow that was never even. And another one I actually completed was Yudhisthira going up to the Himalayas. It was easy kind of painting. It was mostly landscape with Yudhisthira. And there was one with Parikit in the womb, with Vishnu coming into the womb to save. I also didn't finish. There was at least 6 paintings that I didn't finish when I was first doing. They were used, but there were other people, like mostly Jadharani, had to finish them. And then somehow or other, I didn't gel with the whole art. I moved over to the temple. I was painting there, and then I went to India. Probably had a big meeting with the artists, encouraging us to all go to India in the beginning of '73. And Bardraj, was decided that Bardraj would go, and this other fellow, Peter Hawkins, he was a professional artist, a British fellow. So they both went, but Peter Hawkins fell in Maya, got to India, but Bardraj was there. It's a long story. But probably, he was very much into the art department, and he said, bring 1 ton of art supplies, because we asked, is there any art supplies? I found out later there were. In Calcutta, there were 2 little art stores, GC Lau and another one right next to each other. They were the only art stores. Hopefully it's expanded now in the last, 50, 45 years. So I dragged this huge duffel bag of oil paint and stuff, on the plane. That's a whole other story. It's very kind of fun.
And Prabhu, over the years that you were in the presence of Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was present on this planet, in terms of reading books, giving specific instructions from the books, would Srila Prabhupada point out to the details in the books to guide the devotees who are trying to say?
It was all read the book, pick out pictures. He didn't even specify. From the time I joined, he wasn't. I think when there was Gita, he probably specified some of the paintings himself, but you'd have to go back and look at all those letters, which are ample. I mean, Jadharani saved them. Somehow she even has the questions. I don't know how she saved them all. So the questions and answers about Gita. And so I didn't have anything to do with Krishna book and Gita, but I started with the Bhagavatam. And then I skipped, like I said, from practically the beginning of '74 until mid '70, May, June of '75. Then I came back to LA. When I first came into Jadharani's studio from India, I want to say probably May of '75, just as the anecdotal to show you how kind of spacey the material world is. There was a photo of a painting of mine of Prabhupada that was in the LA temple that I'd done during my stint in LA from '70, beginning of '71. So I saw it on her desk, and I said, "Oh, what's that?" She said, "Oh, this is a mystery artist. We're trying to get, we don't know who did this painting." In those days, I didn't sign it. Nobody signed it. I said, "What? It's a big mystery. I did it, There was no to even know, here it is from, say, early '71 or late '70 to maybe on mid '75. But she couldn't find anyone who could tell her who did that painting. So I solved that mystery. Then I got an assignment to do a Lord Chaitanya painting that she had already sketched out. It was their circumambulating Jagannath. But we had no idea what the Jagannath altar looked like. And Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya and Sarvabhauma, they're circumambulating. So that was the first painting, and probably the best painting I did. I think I spent more time on it. Then the marathon kicked in. That book might not have been part of the marathon. So in the beginning, when I came back, we weren't doing marathon until Prabhupada showed up and then said, we're so far behind, we have to start. And there were different things that famous historians.
You were mentioning earlier, Prabhu, that Srila Prabhupada would, I didn't hear the complete sentence, but you were going on a thought where you were sharing how Srila Prabhupada would tell you all to read the book and then sort of pick out yourself what you like to draw. Is that how it was?
Well, previous to me showing up in the ISKCON, I think Prabhupada gave some hints on which paintings, but they had their own choice. Bardraj and Jadharani could tell you, that if you ever get to interview them. But it's there in the book. You can infer it from Jadharani's book. I could get back to you on it exactly, but I think there was always leeway that the artist could pick out what inspired them, and they would do it. So later on, when I was there, I can just speak clearly on that there would be, the group would decide, Jadharani and Rameshwar decide which were salient, say, pastimes that should be definitely illustrated. And I didn't have any say in it. Even Muralidhar and Prickett, they were big artists. Or Bardraj, and he was already doing the Fate exhibit, the museum. It was all Jadharani and Rameshwar, and they were controlling that whole situation. And then when we had the idea, then we'd have a group meeting with thumbnail sketches, and thumbnail, basic sketch, just conceptual, like a 3-4 inch little rough sketch would be presented before the group and people would give their input. That was the optimum way to do it,
Right.
There was other intrigues which wouldn't bear on the reading a book. But I used to read, because I wasn't the top artist. I won't say make it my business, but I just used to read. Basically, I would chant 10 or 12 rounds, and then I would read up till lunchtime. So, and maybe Murlidhar, he was a very straight-laced guy, from the Midwest. He's been blue for 35 years, but he used to get on my case sometimes. He'd see me reading in the temple room, say, hey, Puskar, you're not chanting your rounds. I said, hey, man, you're not my keeper here. I chanted up. Pay, mind your own business. So, it's like, he didn't like, of course he read, everybody read. Jadharani definitely read. In fact, one time at Tiffany Place in Brooklyn, Jadharani, I think it was just me and maybe Murlidhar or one other. We were in the art room. And Jadharani said, does anyone want to hear any TLC? So, we're used to Jadharani. We took her for granted, Marla. It's kind of, I moved out from that art room, like I said, over to the temple. Maybe not just to get away from her, but it was crowded. But she just said it, and no one said anything. It was just me and somebody else, or maybe it was just me, even if I think that. And anyway, after a few seconds of quiet, I said, okay, what do you mean? She read to us. We didn't even know what she was talking about. And then she started speaking. And it sounded familiar. So after she was just talking for about 2-3 minutes, I sounded familiar. So I picked up the TLC. She was doing verbatim the TLC introduction. And she went on for about 8 pages. I finally had the book in my hand. I was checking, So she definitely read. She memorized at least a lot. She used to give probably half the classes in those days in New York. And
wow.
She had a fabulous memory, but now but in those days she was pretty phenomenal like that. She was pretty big time until Harikesh came back from India, and Harikesh, rest his soul, he was very charismatic for some reason. He'd been with Prabhupada in India, and he had a lot of associations. So he was very sickly when he first came back. And then after a few weeks, they had the idea, well, we should ask Harikesh to give class. In those days, classes where I think I gave one, a little here and there, but Jadharani, as I said, and Jayadurya were the main ones. And others, we had our Yogeshwars, our Pradyumnas. So we had a lot of good BBT people. They were pretty much hooked up into the books, And the one day they had Harikesh give the class, and because he had all this nectar from Prabhupada, he made everybody else look like, diminished. I can't say it would be like when Vamandev came and all the great sages there, they looked diminished in presence, at the Brigu Kacha, arena. Yeah. So, but yeah, he would give every Saturday to get people fired up. He would give the class about book distribution. I remember Jadharani running. She was so fired up. I have a lot of people were running to get their book bags to distribute books, and Harikesh was so into it, He would give pastimes of Prabhupada. He'd been with Prabhupada. He had much more association than anybody really at the time. It was a secretary, and then he got sick and came back. Mm-hmm. So there's something there to be with Prabhupada, Not always. But
Prabhu, now it's been 50 plus years for you that you're associating with Srila Prabhupada's books. Can you share with us what contribution has Srila Prabhupada's books made in your life? So far we got an opportunity to hear from you how you engaged in the service of the books, how you contributed to the books. Now I'd like to ask you a few questions on how they've contributed to your own spiritual life in the early years, and maybe something you may want to share with us over the period of these 43 plus years since Srila Prabhupada departed from this world.
Yeah. Well, I'd just like to throw in how the association is so important. That I was reading, like I said, I would read and study shlokas. I had shloka cards, especially beginning in 72, 3, 4, 5. In LA, it was Dravida. There was Gopi Pranadhana. There was, a whole array of people that studied the books. That was their job every day and night, right? So you were hooked in, Dravida would be chanting these slokas, right? And I remember being in 75, I was in Mayapur. I'd been there a year already. I was practically, nobody stayed. I mean, Bardars was there. We stayed. I used to wonder why people should be jamming this place, To me, it was ecstatic, But there was no one there. From after the festival, there was only a few Westerners, Johnny Voss, and 7 or 8 white Westerners. But in those days, so then in 75, so the other artists came. They hadn't been there. Jadharani didn't come, but Parikshit and Muralidhar came. But so Dravida came. And I remembered him vaguely as a bhakta when I left. And he was reciting all the slokas, And I was like, wow. I said, you haven't been around that long. You've been around a year and a half, but he knew so many things. And he said, well, yeah, because I've been editing the CC, And then when I went back to LA, he'd be chanting so many slokas. And I kind of partially felt not sorry for him, but I felt competitive more. The way he's chanting, he needs someone to chant with. So I would try to cram some slokas and keep up with him. And my old friend Kusha Krata was he came later in 76 after the festival time, came back from India, and he was, of course, he was a complete avadut, but Dravida, and there was Jai Sachinanda and Gopi Pranadhana. Like Gopi Pranadhana, one day I was standing outside the press, the BBT buildings across from the temple. You've been to LA Temple? I'm not sure. So, so we were talking something, and he said, oh, yeah, I'm memorizing the Brahma Samhita. So I said, oh, cool, whatever, So then several days later, I saw him, and I said, oh, so you finished the Govinda prayers. I just said like that because I assumed he meant the Govinda prayers. He said, no, I did the whole Brahma Samhita. He said, I'm doing 1-1. And then I kept it up a little bit, and he was doing a chapter every 3 days, memorizing. He got up to the third canto and passed somewhere in the third canto, and I lost track, so I don't know how far he went. And I remember saying to him, but it takes time. You have to go back and go over your previous chapters and slokas. And he said, no, I don't have to do that. Oh, he didn't say it even, and he, with a scintilla of ego in it, it was all like, I don't have to do, of course, he just was memorizing. So I think the association is the thing, for the books. Somebody who's doing it and quoting it, and then you want to do it. Like in LA, when I first joined there, of course, in Hawaii, we didn't think of memorizing, But when I joined in ISKCON, then Yasodananda was the only one who was became a sannyasi and all that. But he still knows a lot. Though he's a Ritwik or whatever. But he was memorizing some shlokas. But he was the only one I remember. But when I got to LA and we had the press, the BBT people who had they were memorizing. And as the books came out, moved back to LA. And so that was always that mood when you're in the BBT.
Very potent. It seems a very, very potent environment. Like you emphasize the association. Was wow, what an association. What could we do to have that association, Prabhu? Any tips?
Well, nowadays we have only Zoom and WhatsApp and whatever else platform there, or people still travel a little bit, I guess. But the people, devotees now, are amazing. I see those brahmacharis, Chopati, and they're way ahead of most of the senior devotees. I live in Alachua where we have the biggest cluster of Prabhupada disciples, but they don't all give highly intellectual classes like Dravida. For the last 20 years, or more than 20 years, he's been coming twice a year here and giving. And then we have the Nagaraj, and so Pundarik Vijayanidhi, he actually prints books and edits books, and But for myself, I immediately kind of half tune out if I hear I don't hear any slokas quoted. Not that we have to gratuitously. In fact, Gopi Pranadhana at one point, he was highly criticized because he was in the mid 70s, 75, like that, 6, 7, he was almost not gratuitously, but he would just quote like half a chapter in Sanskrit, and people were like, "Wait a minute, just chill out." I mean, that's, you don't want to overdo it, you know. He was just, well, just like in third canto, when you just chant 5 slokas in a row and say a few words, and then another 5. It was like way, you know, it's too much. You know, you have to have a balance. But I always like to hear some verses. Like when I hear Gauranga or somebody, he'll quote like 8 shlokas, 10, 20 shlokas I don't even know, you know, and it'll give me empathy. But I never get around to actually studying it. Like right now, we're doing these different astakams for, today was the last day already, but for the Purushottam month, and Prangovinda had us doing different astakams. You know, today they did the Sad Goswami, but then yesterday we did, we were doing Nanda Namami now. So then when you hear it, but I don't know it, right? So I want to go back. And so now I picked up in doing the Sachi Tanai Astakam. And of course, it's not Bhagavatam, it's not Prabhupada's books per se, but when I first heard Prabhupada speaking, when he came to Henry Street in 71, he was lecturing on 6 canto, Ajamil. And now those are not nectar shlokas, but it sounded so authoritative. I was very attracted to hear him, you know, Kitchit so, you know, Kitchit Kevalaya Bhakta Vasudeva Brayana. So I was always very, I mean, next life I'll maybe a Sanskrit scholar. I'm not a grammatical, but I'd like to, you know, hear the Sanskrit and the Bengali too. You know, so yeah, but I mean, it's amazing to me. Sadly, many senior people, they don't, after 50 years, you know, you try to catch them and quote one verse and it would be hard, you know. They could maybe get the samsara prayers, the Gurvasta come out maybe. So, but
Prabhu,
yeah,
did you in your daily routine or regularly, do you like to stay in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books, given that you may have read them a few times over?
yeah, I mean, I have a problem in that, let's say I have a Laghu Bhagavatamrita, that's not Prabhupada's book, but for instance, I'll get obsessed with learning, you know, I'll see a few shlokas that I like, and I won't be able to read the whole book, even with Gopal Champu. But with Prabhupada's books, it's different because I already know it. So I can zip through, I can speed read, you know, a typical, I don't have any organized way like Prahladananda Swami. He's the opposite of me, you know. I'm just, what's the word? Haphazard, or I don't want to say not slipshod, but there's a word, scattershot, you know. Like I'll get inspired and I'll take 4 or 5 books off the shelf, some Prabhupada, some other books, and I'll just say, oh, I really want to read all of them, but I can't read all of them at once, right? So I'll open one and I won't even touch the others for like maybe a month. I don't know. So these things happen. But so say I have you know, that I gave a class and then I forgot a shloka that I wanted. So I'll say, oh, that's that verse in Ajamil, you know, in the 6, 1, 2, 3, you know, especially. So I'll pick up and I'll just go and really study that again, you know, say, why did I forget that verse? And boom, I'll go back in there. And then I'll think, well, what am I just concentrating on these chapters for? I should also do, you know, other parts of 6 canto. Then I'll think, well, what about Prabhupada's prayers? I forgot that sloka, and I'll go back, you know, Oshtasi Dharime Kagra, Manasa Susamahita, you know, Gadgadaya Vacha, Tanyasta Hridayakshana. You're just different things are impetuses. So it's good when people are quoting, and it's a little more frustrating, transcendently frustrating, when you have these brainiacs quoting more than I know, and I have to go back and try, but I never really catch up, you know, to. But I think it should be just the flow of what you're doing. There's no question of a competition, but it's good that the transcendental competition.
Yes, definitely. Prabhu, I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you about, in your experience, what have you noticed happen in the lives of devotees, managers who are not taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada's books? Any observations that you made?
Well, I don't know if those managers lasted or who they are now, but I know, I don't know who's reading, who's not, who's reading. I mean, like I said, practically, I've seen it where um, now it hasn't happened in a while, but they'll ask some senior Prabhupada disciple to give a class who hasn't given a class maybe in 50 years or had never even. And generally speaking, there might be a pleasant surprise somewhere, but you're shocking that they can't quote anything, or they doesn't seem like. But they have reading groups. I mean, there are people. I'm not attending, but there's actually 1,000 devotees or more. So they have their little reading groups, and of course the Latinos, and you have Russians, and you have Ritwiks, and you have Gaudias, and they're all doing their own thing with a lot of people. So the mainstream ISKCON temple, Pran Govind is now, I won't say he's a manager, he's not the manager, but he manages the morning program. He's very much into, studying. That's his thing. He studies all day and gives classes all day. It's practically all he does. So that's a good thing, Some people find it could be a little annoying, but too much for them. What they can't all this ostikums and, But for me, I say, well, yeah, I'll just have to learn that, And it's good because if you forget something, we have here Krishna Swarup, you may know from Mayapur, Nepali Brahmin devotee, very sweet, and he's a great guy to have around. Like, if I have a question on some Sanskrit word there's no word for word printed there, I'll say, what about that? What about this? And so, that. He's funny. Like one time, Krishna Swarup. You must, if you're in Mayapur.
Yes. We don't know each other too well, but we're acquainted. I know who you're referring to.
Yeah. Well, he was teaching Sanskrit to the Gurukul in Mayapur, and even outside to make some extra cash. But so, he's amazing, how much, especially stotrams, and that he knows many things, Like one time we were discussing King Kulashekar, quoting a few verses, and he threw a few out. And I said, that's cool. You probably grew up learning that, He said, no, actually it was Amiya Vilas Swami had come several years before and had a 3-day seminar on it. He had never even read any of it. And he hadn't even gone back over it from that 3 years, but he could still probably quote, 40 of the shlokas. I think there's only about 60, 70 in the whole. So he has a really nice singing voice too.
Yes,
so it's good.
Yes.
Good like that.
Yes, Prabhu, definitely. Prabhu, what message would you like to share with some of us who are, much younger to you, are participating in Srila Prabhupada's movement? How would you like to encourage all of us with respect to reading Prabhupada's books every day?
Wow. I couldn't probably explain that in any way that would be sufficient to, there has to be some attraction, I think, to I'm always surprised. I'm actually surprised still 50 years after that people read and they know the stories, but if you ask them to chant a Sanskrit of it, and Prabhupada said they should know. Kirtananda, for instance, told me that when Prabhupada came to New Vrindavan, then he asked him, so that the kids were chanting a few slokas, and he said, so they're learning, Gita, and Kirtananda was never big on Sanskrit anyway, but he said, oh yes, Prabhupada, they're learning the Sanskrit and they're learning all the verses. He assured Prabhupada. I don't know what they learned, but I wasn't there at the time, but Prabhupada said, and the purports, like that. But, the instance of Dallas, when the kids were trained to, Prabhupada came there and they were chanting the principal shlokas. They started chanting the principal shlokas, and Prabhupada said, not like that. From the start, he wanted the whole thing from the beginning. Dharma Kshetri, he said, Dharma Kshetri, Kura Kshetri, like that. So he was big. I just saw another letter recently where after the boys have learned English and Sanskrit, then they should, after that, then the Varnashram college should kick in. So he was definitely pushing that. He didn't want dummies. I mean, not dummies, but, okay, the English, that's nice, and you can recite it. I mean, there were people like, I'm not sure about Prahlada Swami, but they would say he could recite a good portion in English of the Krishna book. But there was a devotee that was left his body long ago, in 80 or so, Akshobhya, and he knew Gita by heart, with the whole English, so people, so I that's not my forte. I mean, if you give it in my own words or something in English, but if you learn the word for words, and then you can learn the Sanskrit verses. Without that, I don't think it's possible just to spout off empty words. You don't have to know every grammatical part, but you have to know what the general meaning of each word is. Then it's much easier. And I think I find it easier to memorize when it's Sanskrit because there's beautiful rhythm and all the chandas like that. And to me, it makes it so much easier. If it was just English, to me, it's a bit dry English. Leche bosh. So it just doesn't have it, the whole thing for me.
Yes.
Right. I used to hear Prabhupada. Yeah.
Please go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, hearing Prabhupada chant like Bengali bhajans, for instance, and in 70 when I first joined, aside from that, there were also Prabhupada, we didn't have that many tapes in those days. You had Prabhupada chanting the Happening album, Samsara Dava, but just to hear it, it's attractive. What does that mean, So, but I remember just zooming in on the word for word, because I knew I had immediately I could understand. I'm never going to learn this unless I learn what every word means. It's just going to be. So I used to hear Prabhupada chanting the Bengali of certain songs like Ye Chai Jagata Jura. I said, what is that? And at that time we didn't even have it printed. The songbook wasn't even out. It didn't come out for a couple of years after. It was difficult to do it then. That we had the Sanskrit in the books, but we didn't have the Bengali there wasn't any songbook. It was very difficult. It was just like, well, it sounds good, but I couldn't pick it up. So you really need to know the word for words. So that's the crux of the matter there.
Well, we'll definitely take that to heart, Prabhu. It's a very important message that you shared with us, that we should try to read sincerely and also try to memorize the beautiful words that Srila Prabhupada has left with us in his Bhaktivedanta purports, translations, the Sanskrit.
Yeah. In fact, when Prabhupada came in, I want to say, not even 71, we had, when the Bhagavatam came out, it must have been 72. Prabhupada asked, and I wasn't part of the person who was asked, but I know it was Prabhupada's order that we printed up first canto shlokas on printed sheets, and everyone got it. And Prabhupada wanted us to chant, like, let's say we chant Janmadhyasya Tolambat. So the next day we would chant the next sloka, and he wanted to go back. That's why I got that idea when I mentioned it to Gopi Pranadhana. Go back and chant the first 3, 4, 5 as you went day after day. Go back, chant all the whole chapter, and then there was a method to it. There was a method. In fact, okay, another interesting anecdote was in 76. I was very attentive in 76. I didn't go to the festival, but Prabhupada was lecturing on Prahlad's prayers, right? So there was Golden Avatar. They were producing these cassette tapes from the reel-to-reel tapes. And the guy there, Krishna Kanti, was putting out, only taking maybe 20, 30% of the reels and making several every month. He would send out, I think it was every month, send out maybe 2 or 3 cassettes, right? So I knew that, well, I may never get to hear this stuff unless I go while he's hearing it. He was hearing the reels in the morning. So I had to miss Bhagavatam. Rameshwar, I remember he got all on my case, Puskar, you're not going to Bhagavatam. I said, yeah, but I'm going to miss Prabhupada's lectures from the festival in Mayapur. I have to go. I was like compelled. I remember being like compelled to go, And during one of those lectures, and I don't know if it's there, you can pick up on it in the folio or anything, but what happened was one morning, what shloka was it? I don't remember, but one of Prahlad's prayers. And then there would always be at least 10, 15 people chanting the Swamis. And at the time, the one Nepali Pandit had joined, named Anantaram Shastri. He had written these prayers glorifying Prabhupada, and he was singing the verse. And so after him, he sort of Ananda. So at one point, Pushna Krishna, after 2 of the Swamis chanted, Pushna Krishna started doing the word for words. He just stopped. And Prabhupada said, why are you stopping them? You can hear, I'm not sure how it looks on transcripts. But then Prabhu said, why are you stopping them? Everyone must chant. He said, it is Bhagavatam shloka, as good as Hare Krishna. That's not an endorsement, and I don't know what is. He said, it is Bhagavatam, as good as Hare Krishna.
That's definitely a very, very important message and a solid endorsement, as we call it, coming from His Divine Grace. Prabhu, it was such a pleasure to speak to you today. And thank you for sharing with us your love for Srila Prabhupada's books, your love for chanting the shlokas, for memorizing the shlokas, and your appreciation for the language, Sanskrit. It's a great pleasure today, because today we got insight into how some of these things are very important. You witnessed it firsthand, including the very beautiful sonnet said by Advaita Acharya, which you heard Prabhupada record and speak personally in Sridhar Mayapur. Puskar Prabhu, thank you for your time, and thank you for inspiring us. And we hope to be in touch again to speak to you again about the importance of reading Prabhupada's books.
Well, after you've gone through the next 6,000 devotees, maybe I'll be in line when I'm 99 years old.
Well, I don't know whether you may be in line. I may be somewhere else by that time. So, but I hope to have your association once again much before that, if Krishna will.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for your time. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and his transcendental books. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.